This is the story of Nehemiah, a man who began as a cupbearer in a foreign palace and ended up rebuilding the broken walls of Jerusalem. He didn't start with power, armies, or influence. He started with prayer and the willingness to risk everything. Because when God calls you to rebuild what's broken, He also gives you the strength to finish the work if you don't give up. The cup in Nehemiah's hand was cracked, barely noticeable, a faint hairline just beneath the rim. But when you serve the king of Persia, nothing goes unnoticed. He stared at it. The reflection of the palace torches wobbled across the surface. "Bad omen?" a voice whispered. Nehemiah looked up. Ezekiel, the steward of spices, stood nearby, sorting dried lavender into gold bowls. "Or just bad pottery?" the steward grinned. Nehemiah smiled faintly, then carefully set the cup aside. "The king won't drink from anything broken," he said. "Neither would you," Ezekiel replied. But Nehemiah wasn't talking about cups. All day, he had felt the weight behind his eyes, not from lack of sleep, from the news that had arrived 4 days ago. News about home, Jerusalem, his people's city, once proud, once holy. Now a heap of burned gates and broken stones. The messenger had said the walls were rubble. The people were exhausted. The gates were black with ash. Nehemiah hadn't eaten properly since. He still walked through the palace like nothing was wrong. Still wore the fine linens of a royal servant. Still tasted the wine and offered the cup with a bow. But his soul torn, just like the wall. And today, of all days, the cup was cracked. He stared at it longer than he should have. Too long. Because when he handed the next cup to King Artaxerxes, the king frowned. "Nehemiah," the king said slowly, "why does your face look so troubled when you are not ill?" Nehemiah froze. Silence thickened the air. No one showed sadness before the king, not without punishment. "This can only be sorrow of heart," the king continued. "Speak." Nehemiah did what he always did when fear gripped his chest. He prayed, fast and silent, "Lord, give me words." Then he said, "May the king live forever. But how can I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king leaned back. The queen glanced up. The room waited. "What do you want?" the king asked. Nehemiah's throat went dry. Here it was. His moment. A cracked cup in the hand of a broken-hearted man. And suddenly, the chance to rebuild what had been broken. King Artaxerxes stared at Nehemiah with the stillness of a hunter watching a bird decide whether or not to fly. "What do you want?" he had asked. A dozen guards stood around the royal hall gripping spears. One wrong word could mean exile or worse. Nehemiah prayed again, not with fancy words, just 3 desperate ones inside his chest. "Help me, Lord." He stepped forward. "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors, so I can rebuild it." The court fell silent. Even the wine pourers stopped mid-pour. The queen looked at Nehemiah like she wasn't sure whether to cry or laugh. The king blinked slowly. Then he leaned in. "Rebuild it?" he said. "You, a cupbearer?" Nehemiah didn't flinch. "I may serve wine, but my heart serves God, and his city lies in ruin." There was a pause. A dangerous pause. Then the king asked the most unexpected question. How long will you be gone? Nehemiah's eyes widened. You're letting me go? The king raised one eyebrow. I didn't say that yet. But you're thinking about it. Don't push your luck, Nehemiah. They both smiled. Just a little. And suddenly, a cupbearer was being granted permission to do what no soldier or priest had yet dared. Lead a rebuilding mission in the name of a broken city. But Nehemiah wasn't done. Oh no. He took a deep breath. Also, may I have letters? Letters? The king asked. To the governors beyond the river, for safe passage. Anything else? Timber, from the king's forest, for the gates, and for my house. The king rubbed his temples. You ask for wood, paper, protection, and you still want your old job when you come back? Nehemiah grinned. Only if you haven't replaced me. Artaxerxes let out a dry chuckle, then waved his hand. Granted. Nehemiah fell to his knees. Thank you, my king. Go, the king said. But remember, you represent me now. No, Nehemiah whispered under his breath. I represent something older than any empire. That night, as torches were lit and the scrolls were sealed, Nehemiah walked the palace corridors in a daze. A cupbearer had become a commander, but not because he was talented, not because he was strong, because he had prayed and God had opened a door. The letters were sealed. The guards were chosen. The wagons were packed. Nehemiah stood at the edge of the palace gates, hand resting on a cedar staff the king himself had given him. But his thoughts? They weren't in Persia anymore. They were far away in a memory he rarely touched, a memory of dust, of tents, and of a name that sounded like a song. He was 10 years old the first time he heard it. Jerusalem. He had been playing near the spice crates with a reed toy, mimicking soldiers, swinging it like a sword. Around him, servants moved like quiet shadows, careful not to make noise. Then he heard them, two elders sitting beneath an olive awning, speaking in hushed voices. Did you hear what happened near the temple ruins? The stones are still scattered, the gates still burned. My cousin tried to rebuild a section once. Bandits tore it down in 3 days. Young Nehemiah peeked over the barrel. What's the place called? He asked. The older man turned. Jerusalem. Nehemiah frowned. What's that? The man looked surprised, then sad. A city that used to stand tall, now forgotten. Why doesn't someone fix it? Nehemiah asked. The other man chuckled bitterly. Boy, that wall isn't just made of stone, it's made of shame. Years passed. The name Jerusalem stuck with him, not like a memory, but like a drumbeat. At night, he would hear it in the wind brushing the palace shutters, in the rhythm of the cup being filled, in the quiet tears of elders who refused to speak of home. And when he became the king's cupbearer, no one questioned his loyalty. But every time he poured wine into a golden cup, every time he heard laughter echo off marble columns, every time someone praised the beauty of Persia, he thought of the broken gates and wondered, could it be rebuilt? Now, standing at the head of a caravan heading west, the answer was no longer a dream. It was a decision. He turned to the lead guard. We ride at sunrise. Straight through the mountains? Straight to Jerusalem. The first glimpse of Jerusalem was not what Nehemiah had imagined. There were no glowing gates, no golden rooftops shining in the sun. There were only shadows, ruins, silence. Even the wind held its breath. The caravan approached slowly, wheels creaking as oxen pulled carts over broken stones. Nehemiah kept his hood drawn low. Only a few of the local leaders knew he was coming. He had given strict instructions: no trumpets, no welcome party, no attention. If this mission was to succeed, it would begin with observation, not announcements. That night, he didn't sleep. He waited until the camp grew quiet, until the guards yawned and the fire dropped to glowing coals. Then he rose silently, led only by moonlight, and mounted a borrowed horse. "You're going alone?" asked his assistant, Azarel. "No one else should see this," Nehemiah replied. "Not yet." "See what?" "What I'm up against." The horse moved carefully through narrow alleys and abandoned roads. What was once a bustling city now felt like a graveyard with doors, piles of stone where gates once stood, sections of wall half buried in thorns, burned beams like blackened bones. Nehemiah passed the old fish gate, now collapsed into a muddy ditch. He stepped around the valley gate where once soldiers had stood guard. Now dogs slept in its shade. He reached the dung gate, its name still earned. The air was thick with ash and decay. Still, he pressed on. He turned a corner and stopped suddenly. A man was there, sitting beside the base of the wall, silent, still. Nehemiah's horse whinnied, uneasy. The man didn't move. Nehemiah dismounted. "Are you well?" he asked. The man raised his head slowly. His face was worn, not from age, from grief. "You're the builder," the man whispered. "I haven't built anything yet." "Not with your hands," he said. "But your coming builds something we forgot." "What's that?" "Hope." Nehemiah stood in silence, then sat beside him. "What happened here?" The man looked out at the darkness. "We tried once, after the exile, started laying stones again. But enemies came, officials mocked, and then our own people gave up." "Why?" "Because fear is louder than faith." The words sank into Nehemiah's chest like stones in water. He looked at the jagged wall before him, then at his hands, so clean, so unused to building. He whispered, "Lord, if you gave me this burden, give me the strength to carry it." The man rose and disappeared into the night. Nehemiah remained, staring at the wall until the stars began to fade. Then quietly, he whispered to the stones, "We're going to rise again, all of us." And this time, he meant it. The sun had barely crested the hills when Nehemiah called a meeting. It wasn't grand. No banners, no horns, just a simple gathering near the old well where elders used to speak justice under the shade of palm trees. Now those trees were mostly stumps, and justice scattered. Word spread quickly. Leaders from the broken city, priests, merchants, stonecutters, farmers, gathered, eyes wary, arms folded. They had heard rumors. A man from the palace, a man with scrolls, a man who didn't flinch when he saw the ruin. Nehemiah stood on a low stone slab and waited until the murmuring died down. Then he spoke. "You see it with your own eyes. Jerusalem lies in disgrace. The gates burned, the walls broken, our people divided. We've waited for rescue. It's not coming. We've waited for the right time. It's here." We've waited for someone else, but now God has sent us. He raised the king's sealed letters. I've come with permission, with provision, with purpose. Let us rise up and rebuild. For a moment, silence. Then an old woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. You think we haven't tried? I know you have, Nehemiah said gently, but not together. A younger man nodded. A priest stepped closer. A murmur of agreement spread. Until dash. Rebuild? A voice called sharply. That would be a mistake. All eyes turned. Two men stood at the edge of the gathering. One was tall, with a deep crimson sash and the smirk of someone used to being obeyed. Sanballat. The other, shorter, with a golden belt and scrolls tucked into his sleeves, scanned the crowd as if memorizing faces. Tobiah. Behind them were soldiers. Not many, but enough to remind everyone they didn't come to join in. Sanballat's voice rose like smoke. You're wasting time, Nehemiah. These people don't need walls. They need peace. Peace doesn't grow in ruins, Nehemiah replied. Tobiah stepped forward, waving a scroll. You're stirring rebellion. The king won't tolerate unrest. Nehemiah reached into his cloak and unrolled his own letter, stamped with the royal seal. The king sent me. Tobiah's face twitched. Sanballat's grin faded. Even so, Sanballat said slowly, you'll never finish this. You'll run out of strength or courage. A few people in the crowd hesitated. A worker lowered his hammer. Nehemiah saw it and stepped up higher on the stone. You have no share in Jerusalem, he declared. No right, no history, no future here. But we, his servants, will arise and build, because the God of heaven himself is with us. The crowd was still. Then one man raised his tool. Another called out, I'll build the east gate. I'll fix the Tower of the 100, someone else shouted. Hope broke loose like a flood. Nehemiah's voice steadied them. This will not be easy. There will be enemies. There will be fear. But we will not stop. Because when God calls you to rebuild, he also gives you the strength to finish. Sanballat and Tobiah turned, their cloaks snapping in the breeze as they walked off. But their threat lingered, and Nehemiah knew. Next time, they wouldn't just bring words. The wall came to life before the sun. At first light, the city stirred like it hadn't in years, not with fear, but with purpose. Stonecutters hauled limestone from broken courtyards. Goldsmiths, unused to dust, traded their delicate tools for shovels. Even perfume makers, whose hands had only known softness, learned how to lift bricks and carry buckets. Nehemiah walked the line, calling out names, encouraging teams. Hananiah, strengthen the western curve. Shalom, your daughters are building faster than your sons. Laughter rose, sweat dripped, spirits soared. For the first time in years, Jerusalem believed something good might actually last, until the spies arrived. At noon, a shepherd came running from the hills, out of breath and wide-eyed. They're gathering, he gasped. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab. They've pulled together men from every surrounding region. They're planning something. Nehemiah clenched his jaw. What kind of something? Raid, Distraction, sabotage. They don't want the wall finished. Nehemiah called the leaders together under a fig tree near the sheep gate. The wall now stood waist high in most places, enough to give them hope, but not enough to protect them. "We keep building," Nehemiah said, "but we build differently now." "Meaning?" asked a priest. Nehemiah drew a sword from his side. "From this point on, no one works with both hands free. One hand builds, the other defends." By the next day, the wall buzzed with the sound of hammers and steel. Children passed buckets, mothers carried stones, men worked with one eye on their wall and one on the horizon. Some laughed nervously, others tightened their grips. But they kept building, because fear had no place when you're holding a sword and a purpose. Nehemiah rotated guards along the perimeter, stationed trumpeters at every key junction. He walked the wall often, speaking to families, reminding them of the reason behind the labor. "Don't fight for the stones," he said. "Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your homes." Then one morning, as dawn cracked open the sky, a messenger arrived with a scroll clenched in his trembling hand. It was from Sanballat. "Come, let us meet together in the plain of Ono." A friendly request, too friendly. Azarel, Nehemiah's assistant, eyed the letter. "It's a trap." Nehemiah nodded. "And a distraction." He handed the scroll back without even writing a reply. "Tell them this: I am doing a great work and cannot come down." The message was sent. The wall kept rising, and so did the pressure. But Nehemiah's hands didn't shake, not when enemies mocked, not when spies slithered in, not even when some of the nobles began secretly exchanging letters with Tobiah. "We build," Nehemiah said, louder than their doubts. "We watch and we pray." Because the enemy might surround them, but God stood above them, and the wall wasn't just stone anymore. It was a testimony. At first the threats came like arrows, loud, sharp, easy to see, but now they came as whispers. Rumors began spreading like cracks through the stones. "Sanballat has spies among us." "Tobiah is friends with some of our nobles." "Geshem offered a bribe to delay the wall." Nehemiah tried to ignore them, tried to keep his eyes on the work. But gossip spreads faster than mortar dries. Then came the letters, each one rolled tight and delivered by trembling hands. The same message again and again. "Come, Nehemiah, let us meet together in the valley of Ono." Polite, friendly, harmless sounding. But Nehemiah knew a trap when he saw one. "They want to pull me away from the work," he muttered, showing the latest scroll to Azarel. "Should we respond?" "I already did." "What did you say?" Nehemiah smiled faintly. "I am doing a great work and cannot come down." But the enemy wasn't done. If they couldn't stop the wall with force, they'd try to shatter trust from the inside. Late one night, Nehemiah was summoned by a priest named Shemaiah. The man met him in a dim storeroom of the temple where oil lamps flickered like nervous hearts. "Nehemiah," he said in a low voice, "they're coming to kill you tonight." Nehemiah froze. "Then I'll be ready." "No, you must hide in the temple itself, behind the veil. You'll be safe there." Something felt wrong, too secret, too convenient. And then it clicked. "You've been paid," Nehemiah said slowly. "You're trying to trick me into sin, into hiding where only priests are allowed." Shemaiah said nothing. Nehemiah stepped back. If I run in fear now, the people will lose heart, and I will have lied to the very God I serve. He left the storeroom without another word. That night, he didn't hide. He didn't run. He stood on the wall with a torch in one hand and a sword at his side, watching the shadows. Listening to the wind, the attack never came, but the people saw him. And when they woke to see their leader still standing on the stones at sunrise, they believed again. Not just in the wall, but in the God who strengthens hands that refuse to quit. The wall was nearly finished. Only the gates remained. Wooden frames had been shaped, iron bolts fitted. The people could almost taste completion, which meant the enemy was desperate. On the fourth day of gate work, a courier approached the wall with a scroll in hand. But unlike the private notes from before, this scroll was open, not sealed, not discreet. It was meant to be read aloud. Nehemiah climbed down from the tower where he'd been overseeing carpenters. "Who sent it?" he asked. "Sanballat," the courier replied. "He asked for it to be read publicly." Nehemiah unrolled it slowly. The handwriting was neat. The lies were not. "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem confirms it, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel. That is why you are building the wall, and according to these reports, you wish to become their king. You have appointed prophets to proclaim you in Jerusalem. Nehemiah is king in Judah. Now this will be reported to the king of Persia. So come, let us talk this over." The crowd began to murmur. People shifted nervously. Even a few workers set down their tools. Nehemiah didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't call for a defense counsel. He simply took a deep breath and said, "None of this is true. You are inventing lies in your mind." He raised the scroll high and tore it in half. The pieces fluttered like dead leaves into the dust. Then he turned to the crowd. "Their hands are shaking," he said. "They want ours to do the same. But we will not stop, not for rumors, not for cowards, not even for kings. We have a wall to finish and a God who sees everything." The workers roared. Tools lifted. Dust flew. The sound of hammers echoed louder than ever before. That night, Nehemiah wrote in his personal scroll, "They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, 'Now strengthen my hands.'" And the next morning, when the people rose, the gates were almost ready. The wall stood tall, and not even a lie could tear it down. The wall was finished. 52 days. That's all it had taken. 52 days of sweat, prayer, fear, resistance, and faith. And now? It stood strong around the city like an answered prayer made of stone. People sang, children danced, elders wept. For the first time in a generation, Jerusalem felt like Jerusalem again. But Nehemiah? He didn't celebrate yet because the wall was strong. But the hearts inside it still cracked. It started small, a whisper in the grain line, a passing word from a trader. Tobiah sent another letter. Nehemiah frowned. To whom? The answer chilled him. To our nobles. Tobiah, the same Ammonite official who mocked the wall. The same man who tried to lure Nehemiah into a trap. Now, he was writing letters to Nehemiah's allies, and worse, some were writing back. Nehemiah dug deeper. What he uncovered made his chest tighten. Several of the city's nobles had family ties with Tobiah. His son had married into a respected Jewish family. His friends held trading rights through Jerusalem's markets. They called him their brother, Nehemiah said bitterly, pacing his chamber. Azarel, his assistant, nodded. They think he's just political. Number, he's poison. The next day, Nehemiah summoned the nobles. They arrived with polite smiles and guarded eyes. He wasted no time. Why are you exchanging words with a man who tried to stop God's work? He's not our enemy, one of them replied. He is, when your loyalty to him makes you disloyal to truth. Another elder stepped forward. He's family to us now. Then maybe, Nehemiah said, voice low and clear, you should remember which family built this wall and which tried to tear it down. The room fell silent. No one responded, but Nehemiah could feel it. Loyalty was being tested, not by armies, but by alliances. That night, he prayed long, longer than he had since the first stone was laid. God, don't let us rebuild only in stone. Rebuild us in spirit. Because if the people inside the wall kept opening doors to their enemies, then the wall would be the strongest thing in the city. And that was never how God meant it to be. Nehemiah stood at the edge of the square, watching the crowd gather as the sun climbed above the eastern gate. It was not a normal day. This wasn't a festival, not a market, not a battle. It was something different. It was time to rebuild something deeper. Ezra, the priest, stepped forward, scrolls in hand. Not letters, not plans, the law. The very words God had given Moses, forgotten by many, misunderstood by most, and unread for too long. Nehemiah gave a quiet nod. Ezra unrolled the scroll and read. At first the people stood in silence. Some shaded their eyes. Some leaned in. But then, as the words continued, laws about justice, mercy, holiness, obedience, something shifted. Eyes widened. Heads dropped. Fingers trembled. We didn't know, someone whispered. We've broken all of it, another murmured. Children clung to mothers. Men covered their mouths. And before long, the entire square was weeping. Nehemiah stepped forward, hands raised. Do not mourn today, he said. Not today. But we have sinned. Yes. But today is holy. Not because we're clean, but because God has returned to us. Eat, drink, share with those who have nothing. The joy of the Lord is your strength. The people hesitated. Then someone brought bread from their satchel. Someone else passed figs to a stranger. Children started laughing through tears. And what began as grief turned into joy. That night Nehemiah sat beside the gate, looking out toward the hills. Azarel sat next to him, chewing on a pomegranate seed. You did it, he said. No, Nehemiah replied. God did. The wall, the people, the reading, it's all working. It's not finished, Nehemiah said quietly. Azarel blinked. What's left? Nehemiah turned, eyes sharp. Hearts don't change in a day. The real rebuilding starts now. Because even though they were celebrating, some hearts were already drifting. Old habits, old loyalties, hidden sins. And Nehemiah knew the greatest threat to a strong city was a soft conscience. The days after the reading of the law were full of energy. People promised change. Traders brought fair scales to the market. Families paid off old debts. Even the city gates were shut on the Sabbath for the first time in years. It felt like revival. But revival isn't real until it's tested. It started with a small whisper. A boy told a baker that he saw something strange at the temple. The baker told his cousin, who told a merchant, who told Azarel, who told Nehemiah. They said Eliashib gave a room away. Who's Eliashib? Nehemiah asked. The high priest. A room. To whom? Azarel hesitated. To Tobiah. Nehemiah stopped walking. The street went quiet around them. Tobiah? He said slowly. The one who mocked the wall? The very one. Where? In the house of God. Nehemiah didn't wait. He didn't send a message. He didn't hold a meeting. He stormed the temple, past the inner gate, past the altar, through the hallway behind the storeroom chambers, rooms meant to hold offerings and grain for the Levites. He kicked open the door, and there, in the center of it all, Tobiah's furniture, silk cushions, imported baskets, scrolls in his handwriting. It was a private suite right in the holy place. Nehemiah's hands clenched into fists. He didn't shout. He didn't even blink. He began to throw things, scrolls, tossed into the courtyard, silks, ripped and burned, chests, dragged out into the street. Priests came running. What are you doing? What should have been done the moment that man walked in? But Eliashib gave permission. Then Eliashib has forgotten who this temple belongs to. When the room was empty, Nehemiah ordered it to be purified. Every corner scrubbed, every curtain replaced, fresh grain laid in its place. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Remember me, my God, for this. Do not wipe out the work I've done for your house. Because even after the wall, even after the vows, even after the revival, some people still opened secret doors to their enemies. And Nehemiah had learned the hard way. You can't just rebuild the outside of a city. You must fight for the inside too." The wall stood tall. The temple was clean. The people had made promises. But Nehemiah could feel it. The cracks were returning, not in stone, but in hearts. It began with the smell of fish. Nehemiah was walking the southern quarter one Sabbath when the scent hit him. Fresh fish, salted meat, baskets of figs. He followed the scent around the corner and stopped. A market. Open. On the Sabbath. Traders from Tyre unloading goods. Local buyers crowding tables. Silver changing hands. "Stop!" Nehemiah shouted. The crowd froze. One merchant stepped forward, nervous. "It's just business," he said. "We're not hurting anyone." "You're breaking covenant," Nehemiah snapped. "The wall protects us now." "No," Nehemiah said slowly. "Obedience protects us now." That night, he commanded the gates be shut at sunset before every Sabbath and not reopened until it ended. Guards were posted. Merchants were warned. And still, some camped outside the walls, waiting. "Why are they still here?" Azarel asked. "Because they think we'll cave," Nehemiah replied. "They don't believe we'll stand." "Will we?" "Yes. Even if I have to post guards with swords. We didn't rebuild this wall just to open the door to compromise." But that wasn't all. Another whisper reached his ears, another betrayal. The people had married foreign wives again, Moabites, Ammonites, Ashdodites. And the children? They couldn't even speak the language of Judah anymore. Nehemiah called a meeting in the square. Fathers, mothers, elders, priests. He spoke with fire. We made a vow. We promised to walk in God's ways. Have you forgotten Solomon, loved by God, yet led into sin by foreign wives? Do you want that same judgment? Some shouted back. Some argued. Some turned away. But some wept. Some repented. And a remnant remained faithful. That night, Nehemiah walked the wall alone. One lap, then two. Torch in hand, wind in his cloak. Lord, he prayed, you helped us rebuild. Now help us stay strong. Not just in stone, but in soul. Because rebuilding a city is one thing, but keeping it holy? That takes courage every day. The sun hung low over Jerusalem. The shadows of the gates stretched across the stone streets like long fingers reaching for tomorrow. Nehemiah stood on the eastern wall, watching workers seal the last hinge into the valley gate. He didn't smile. He didn't weep. He simply stared, deep in thought, because after 12 years, it was time to go. You're really returning to Persia? Azarel asked, stepping beside him. I gave the king my word, Nehemiah replied, and I won't break it. But you're the reason this place still stands. Exactly why I must leave it in their hands now. Nehemiah spent that week preparing, not his travel pack, but the future of the city. He reviewed the gate schedules, appointed God-fearing men to oversee storehouses, reassigned priests who had grown lazy, and most importantly, he left behind a message. It wasn't written on scrolls. It wasn't carved in stone. It was spoken, heart to heart. He stood in the central square where the people had once wept over the reading of the law. The leaders gathered. Families stood in quiet rows. The elders leaned on staffs, their eyes sharp with age. Nehemiah lifted his hand and spoke. You've rebuilt walls, but the enemy will now try to break what he cannot touch, your unity. He'll send whispers, lies, distractions, comfort that makes you forget to guard your hearts. So remember this, walls are not what protect us. Obedience is. He paused, scanning the crowd. I'm returning to the king, but I am not leaving you leaderless. You have God's word. You have each other. You have the same hands that lifted stones in the sun and prayed in the dark. Stay holy, stay humble, stay awake. Then he turned to the high priest. No more rooms for Tobiah. To the merchants, no more selling on the Sabbath. To the fathers, raise your children to know the language of their people and the language of your God. And then he stepped down, not like a ruler, not like a hero, like a servant who had finished his shift. That night he wrote again, remember me for this, my God, and do not blot out what I have done for the house of my God and its services. He left the next morning before the sun rose. No parade, no farewell song, just the sound of hooves on stone fading down the path. And behind him, the city stood, protected, warned, awakened. Because Nehemiah knew something no wall could teach. A city built by prayer can only be kept by obedience. Years passed. Seasons changed. The gates of Susa opened one morning, and Nehemiah stepped through them. Older, tired, but still watching, still listening. Because word had reached him in whispers. Jerusalem had drifted again. He traveled back with permission from the king. The journey took weeks, and the whole way he prayed, "Lord, let it not be as bad as they say." But when he arrived, it was worse. The gates still stood. The wall was strong, but inside, the same cracks were spreading. Priests were neglecting their duties. Storehouses were empty again. Levites had abandoned their posts. Merchants were back at the gates, selling on the Sabbath. And worst of all, Tobiah's room was restored. Nehemiah stared at the room with hollow eyes. The rugs were new, the cushions fluffed, and Tobiah's name painted in fresh ink above the doorway. Nehemiah didn't yell. He didn't cry. He acted. He ordered the room emptied again, down to the last nail. He threw the furniture into the street. He rebuked the priests, reassigned guards, rebuilt the storehouses, reposted Sabbath watchmen, and called the people once more to repentance. Some were angry, some were ashamed, some remembered. And though there was no great ceremony this time, no public reading, no parade of dedication, the city was stirred, because the one who had first rebuilt their walls had returned not with speeches, but with conviction. That night, Nehemiah walked the wall alone again, just like the very first time. Torch in hand, wind cold against his face, and he prayed, "Remember me, my God, for good. I did not lead for glory. I built because you stirred my heart. I stayed because they still needed truth. And I returned these stones to you." The wall stood. So did the people. And even though Nehemiah would not always be remembered in songs, he had done what few ever dare. He answered God's call and didn't stop building until the very end. God's call and didn't stop building until the very end.